Hey everybody, so I have kind of a different type of video today. I am a big fan of a lot of card makers, and I do make my own cards. Not as often as I scrapbook, but I do love the process of it, and I love sending out my own cards. And I usually don't record them. But I thought I would try that today. I got this background die and there's a lot of little pieces still stuck in there. My mind was racing with all these ideas and things that I wanted to do with it. And so I thought I would record some of that process and show you all the creative things you could do with background dies. This one is actually in two pieces, but I have not snipped them apart because I wanted to cut out the whole thing. So it cuts out the whole piece and then all the pieces in the center. So some of my ideas were I'm going to stitch maybe with sequins. I'm gonna create shaker card. You can see all my sticky notes, keeping my thoughts together. Cut some out of gold foil. I also did a dry emboss with my Big Shot. And I've got all sorts of supplies here: texture paste, Nuvo drops, ink sprays, embossing powders. So I cut out quite a bit of these, and I'm not going to record all of the ideas because some of them are self-explanatory, and I'm not doing anything that is new or revolutionary, but I'm putting my own little spin on it. And I have gotten some of these ideas from watching other card makers, so again, I can't take credit for these. I may not have seen all of the specific ideas done by other crafters, but similar techniques. So I hope you enjoy, and so let's get started. Okay, so this first example, I am using the background die cut as a stencil, and I am using a dauber and some sticky ink. The first one I started with is the Letter It embossing ink from Ranger, and I think mine was a little dry, so I go in with my Versamark pad and just go right to paper. But I used, you can see the ink there on the background, and I am going to apply some Wow embossing powder. The color is called Bluetiful. I think you pronounce it that way. And I really like the mint green color. It's a new one that I got recently. So I'm going to heat emboss that. But before I do that, I am going to take the stencil that I used, that I created from the die cut, and emboss that as well. So I am using another Wow embossing powder, and I'm just going in with my Versamark pad there to make sure I didn't miss any spots. And this is one of my favorite embossing powders. It is metallic sparkle, and I really love the glitter in it and the shine. So I go in a couple of times just to make sure I got all of the spots, and then I'm going to heat emboss both of those panels. If you're like me, you like watching embossing powder melt, there is just something so satisfying about watching it melt. It's the simple things in life, right? So easy thing to do, just, take any of your background dies and you can use it as a stencil for anything. And you'll see that in some other examples that I do here coming up. And like I said earlier, I'm not recording all of the examples that I did because some of them are self-explanatory, but and this one is not necessarily anything new, but I like the way that they turn out, and sometimes it's just easier to show than explain. So this next example, I've already die cut another panel, and I have added it to a white cardstock base, and I adhered it with some adhesive sheet, some stick-it paper, and I'm going in with some very fine glitter from Elizabeth Crafts. I have a few colors of those, and they are super fine, very pretty. And I am using the stick-it paper, now that those little sections are exposed, to add my glitter, and I'm just using a little tiny spoon there to get sort of a gradient look. And I was a little heavy-handed with the first color, so it's not quite even, but I really like the mix of these colors, and any fine glitter will work for this. If you have chunky glitters, the spaces are so small and you might not get as smooth of a look when the color changes, or I'm using the new glitter. So with these glitters though, I've noticed if you burnish it really, really well, I apologize, I'm off camera some, but using your finger and your bone folder, it really helps the shine come through. So here is the next example. I'm using my Distress Oxide sprays. Keep in mind, anytime you make your own stencil from paper, there's always a risk of colors bleeding and it not coming out really clean. And you can see there that mine wasn't entirely clean. I do end up going and cutting it down the edges, but I'm still happy with the way that it looks. So here is another example where I'm using my Nuvo Crystal Drops. I picked out 3 colors and I cut another paper stencil from the die cut, and I am using a rubber spatula to fill in, and it doesn't come out perfect, but that's okay. I like the way that it looks. It's kind of a fall theme to me, which is what the card turns into. I add some leaves and it's super pretty. I didn't intend on using the actual stencil, but you'll see coming up I make that into a card as well, and they turn out really cute. So here is another example of using a paper stencil. I go in with a couple of different textured pastes. The first one is just a sparkle. It's kind of clear. It's from Martha Stewart, and it's got a lot of sparkly glitter, which is hard to tell from the video, but in person it's really pretty. The mistake I make with this next one with the Vicki Boutin Rose Gold Glaze is I reused a stencil. I wiped some of it off, but with the paper stencil it gets warped, and so it wasn't a very clean finished look. I do actually make another one off camera. Don't make you watch me do it again, but it just didn't come out very clean, and this one I wasn't crazy about it. So the paper stencil had already been was already wet from the previous texture paste, so yeah, you're gonna see it's not my favorite, so I do end up going again off camera making another one. You'll see that finished card at the end. So this example, I'm taking some Heidi Swapp texture paste, and I am very heavily, haphazardly adding a very thick layer to my cardstock panel. And then I am going to take a die cut panel that I cut with the background die, and I am going to smush it into it. So you can see there, I'm not trying to be very neat about it. I want a lot of texture. I'm using my pokey tool there to smush in the cardstock die cut, and that takes a while to dry because there was a lot of textured paste on it, but I like the texture that it has. So you'll see that finished card at the end of the video. So these 2 examples, hindsight, I don't know what I was thinking. I should have used watercolor paper because I did apply a good amount of color with these clean, clear brush markers, and right here I'm just testing out the colors just to figure out which ones that I wanted. I knew that I wanted to do sort of a rainbow look. I picked out too many colors at first, so I had to narrow them down. I went in afterwards and tried to add a little bit of water to blend them better, but again, I didn't use watercolor paper, which would have made the blend work a whole lot better. But I, at this point, just decided to color each row in a different color and not worry about the blend. Bristol cardstock would have also worked really well with these markers if you have that in your stash. And so to finish this look, I am going in with my Tonic Crystal Glaze. I love this stuff. And I added another white, actually 2 more white die cut panels on top to give it a little valley. And I'm going through and adding some Tonic Crystal Glaze to each one of these sections. And then I do finish off with another die cut panel. So there's probably 4 layered on this card, but it creates a very nice valley, and the finished look when it's all dry makes it look like a stained glass window type appearance. So this is probably one of my favorites. There's another couple cards that surprisingly become my favorites, but I didn't realize it as I was making these. So it's interesting how things turn out looking and not necessarily the way that you planned, but that's just part of creating, right? So this one turned out to be a very thick card because I had so many die cut panels, but I think that it was necessary. So I'm just weighting it down there with some of the jars that I have. So the last one I go in, I don't make you watch me color it again, but I use my Copic markers. So I'm just gonna run through these. There will be some still shots at the end, but I just wanted to give you a quick look at the finished cards and how they were made. So this one is my shaker. I used sequins and some cute little bits and pieces from Trinity Stamps, like these little stars. They come in all different colors, paired with a die cut stacked sentiment and a stamped sentiment strip. Then these two, so I cut in half and layered a thin strip of red glitter paper. So I thought these would be nice thank you notes after the holidays. So I just stamped a sentiment and added some jewels. So really easy, just cutting one die cut panel in half, making 2 cards. This one is the dry embossed. Make sure you refer to the instructions for your die cutting machine to be sure you have the right sandwich. So it adds the texture as opposed to cutting it out, which I thought was a really nice clean design. Added a stacked white die cut and layered it on a die cut vellum heart just to make sure the sentiment stopped out. You'll find that I did that on a lot of the cards. Just helps it pop off the background. Then I finished it up with some jewels. So these two, this I embossed the die cut and layered it on a piece of white cardstock. For more color, you could do colored cardstock in the background. Then I die cut a sentiment stacked on 3 layers of black cardstock. I used my Tonic shimmer pen to add some sparkle, and then I layered some Tonic Crystal Glaze on it to give it some more shine. So I added some pearls and layered the sentiment on a die cut vellum heart. And then this example, I used the die cut as a stencil to add my Versamark sticky ink, and then I embossed those areas. And then I just layered some cardstock and then a vellum strip, which I glued with some double-sided tape on the back of the white cardstock. And then I heat embossed my sentiment and then finished off with some jewels. And then these 2 examples, it's hard to tell from the video, I think, the difference, but this first example, I just die cut out of colored cardstock, and then I layered it over a piece of glitter cardstock. Again, I stacked a black cardstock die cut sentiment and layered it on a vellum die cut circle. And then this one I showed you in the video, and part of the process, I layered a piece of white cardstock with Stick It double-sided adhesive sheets, and then I added the die cut, the white die cut, background die, and then I added 1 color of glitter. So the difference with this is that you get this gradient look between the colors, this nice blend. I went a little heavy-handed with this color, but I still like the way that it looks. I used another black stacked die cut, and then this one actually came with the shadow die, so I added it on top of a layer of vellum and then finished it off with some jewels. And then these two, very colorful. This one I added several layers of the background die just to give it a stained glass look. So I added one of the die cut background, and then I colored it with my Zig Clean Color brush markers and did all different colors, excuse me, rainbow colors. And then I added another background die, and then I filled in all the little areas with tonic crystal glaze. If you are not familiar, that is this stuff. It's kind of like glossy accents, but this dries really quickly, and I find that the bottom never clogs. And then I added another background die just to give it a clean finish, but it kind of gives a stained glass look. Then this example, I didn't add any of the tonic crystal glaze, or the Nuvo crystal glaze, excuse me. I actually added Nuvo crystal drops. Now, it did not give me as much shine. And then I ended up having to brush it with a marker. So I can see some brush strokes in the background, but it adds a lot of texture, and I just used a different selection of markers. I colored this with Copic markers, but the process was still the same. Again, I stacked my die cut and sentiment and added on a strip of vellum. So this, another obvious technique. I use the die cut, the background die cut to create a stencil, and then I sprayed it with my Distress Oxide inks to get a nice blend between colors. So there was a little bit of bleeding through, but that happens when you use a paper stencil, and I like the way that it looks. It's not perfect, but I like the color combo, and I like the little bit of messiness, and I like when you use Distress Oxides, the different colors that you get when things blend. So I heat embossed my sentiment on a strip of vellum and then finished it off with some sequins. So this one, I ink blended the background with my Distress Oxide ink pads, and then I layered over a piece of silver shimmer cardstock and die cut it with the background die. Again, sentiment strip is layered on a piece of vellum. Then this example, similar to this, so I ink blended the background with my Distress Oxide inks, and then I layered this one under a die cut and cardstock, and then I cut my ink background with the background die. So two different looks. This one, again, another obvious choice. I made another stencil out of the background die, and it might be hard to tell, but I used it as a stencil, and I filled in the spaces with some sparkly texture paste, and then I layered my sentiment on some black cardstock and some Altenew gold foil card, and then a piece of ribbon as opposed to the vellum, just to make sure it popped off the background. This example, similar to this example, so I used the stencil again, a different stencil. I did cut multiple stencils because using a paper stencil more than once gets very tricky. Things don't come out very clean. But I added some Vicki Boutin Rose Gold glaze, and then I added another white cardstock die cut over top just to make it clean. Again, I heat embossed on a sentiment strip, so you can still see the background, but it makes sure that your sentiment stands out a little bit. Now this one, I added a very heavy, thick layer of texture paste. It's in a teal color. And then I took the background die cut and I smushed it into the texture paste. So this one did get a little bent just because of all the moisture, but that'll go away over time. So I was not careful to make it a clean level background, I wanted it to have texture. I wanted there to be a lot, because when you smush the die cut in, then the texture paste sort of seeps through. So I thought that was fun. I just die cut a sentiment out of glitter paper, stacked it on some white cardstock, and then used a vellum circle die cut to place my sentiment on. And then these two have to be my favorite. I didn't actually intend on getting 2 cards out of this, but thought it was fun. So I cut the background die, and I plan to use it as a stencil. I used my Nuvo Crystal Drops and 3 different colors, and I used it as a stencil to create this background. And it didn't come out very neat, and I didn't use as much as you would think to create this. I know people are probably shuddering at the fact that I used my crystal drops to create a background like this, but obviously it's not perfect, but I love the way that it turned out. And so then once it was done, I thought that I could make that into a card also. So I paired it with a Heat Embossed sentiment on a vellum strip, again, just to make sure it popped off the background. And I tucked some die cut leaves out of cardstock, added some glitter and some pearls, and these are definitely fall themed, and some really pretty thank you cards. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, these are not brand new techniques. They're not anything that I created myself in terms of the technique. You've probably seen some of these, but I was inspired by this background die to create lots of different looks, and I just went to town. So hopefully you see something in here that maybe you didn't think of, or it sparks an idea for you to create your own card, or take any background die. This could work with any background die that you have to make a whole set of cards. So, you know, I have 17 cards here for my stash to send out, and so there you go. So I hope you enjoyed watching. Again, I hope that it inspired you to make one of these cards or a similar card using same technique. I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. Please feel free to leave any comments or questions down below about the techniques or products that I used, and I will be back soon with another video. Thanks again. Have a great day. Bye.